interwebs, I am here to review the final episode of Jodie Whitaker's run as the Doctor on Doctor Who in her finale, The Power of the Doctor. And oh boy, this is, I'm gonna be very frank, I am honestly kind of at a loss for words on how to review this episode, because kind of like Jodie Whitaker's entire run, but especially Jodie Whitaker's run since Doctor Who Flux and then into the last few specials that we've gotten, this episode is just an overstuffed, convoluted, weird mess that just shoves in a whole bunch of things, tries to do a whole lot with just a little bit of time, and ultimately my feelings on it are that I liked this episode, and I do think that it is one of the stronger episodes that we've gotten since Flux in this sort of like weird, again, overstuffed, messy series that Doctor Who has become. So I do like it, but almost in spite of its weird, messy nonsense. And then also, I kind of have to take this episode too as a regeneration episode, as like a finale for Jodie Whitaker's era. And in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like is like an amalgamation of everything in Jodie's era. And then also at the same time, which also seems indicative of her era, kind of a disservice to Jodie herself, because this episode just seems to want to do a billion things. And honestly even spends like a good chunk of it without Jodie being the Doctor. And that feels like kind of sad as like a final episode for her. But that also, again, feels like it's fitting for this era, because I feel like in a lot of ways this Jodie Whitaker's tenure as the Doctor has always kind of done a little bit of a disservice to her, because while I have loved Jodie as the Doctor, I really think like when she's given moments to shine, she shines as the Doctor, and that is definitely the case here. The writing has often let her down, and I say this as someone who has been slightly less mean towards Chris Chibnall than others, even people who aren't like the culture war anti-SJW people. I tend to agree with the fact that Chris Chibnall as showrunner on Doctor Who has not been one of the best, and we'll leave it there for now. This special feels like it is honestly just indicative of Jodie's entire era. Messy, weird, has moments that shine through that I really like, and ultimately I think I like this episode almost because of its weird, messy nonsense, because it at least makes it fascinating to talk about and interesting to talk about, but ultimately is kind of like a disservice to Jodie, and not anything concise by any means. And then we will also have to talk about that regeneration, because thoughts on that. But let's start by trying to figure out how to dive into this story. Dan, let's start off with Dan. So we have Dan at the beginning of this episode where he's with Jodie and Yaz trying to take over stop the Cybermen from getting on this train and kidnapping what we eventually learn is like this weird entity thing that looks like a little girl, but it has like all this energy that can power a whole cyber station, whatever, MacGuffin thing. Anywho, Dan helps them out with this opening sequence, and it's actually a fun little sequence, like them on the train. I actually thought it was a good little action bit. Space Train was really fun. But then Dan, after this, just like, oh yeah, I'm kind of done, and then just walks away. And I'm like, what? Just gonna have Dan disappear? And I get that this episode's trying to do a lot, but I mean, at this point, like, why not just have Dan there? Because you're already doing a billion other things. You might as well keep him around. And it's just sort of like weird to just have this character that you introduced just a few episodes ago. I've done not a lot with, though I've liked him as a character, and then just unceremoniously be like, all right, and he's going to be gone. He'll show up for a couple seconds at the end of the episode for a poignant moment. But ultimately, we're just going to say bye to him. That was just very strange. Then we get into this weird plot where I'm going to try to articulate this, but it's weird. The Master is pretending to be Rasputin, which actually really fits the Master. I actually really love that. And the dance sequence that he has where he dances to Ra Ra Rasputin was great. I actually really loved that. But he is pretending to be Rasputin. There is this Cybermen planet above Earth in 1916. And he is working with them to build a converter so that he can make himself the Doctor, sort of having stolen the Time Lord's like technology to do a forced regeneration, which is a thing from like classic Doctor Who. And then he also has the Daleks working with the Cybermen in the present day to kind of like, I guess, blow up the Earth and also capture Jody by having a Dalek who is betraying the Daleks but they're aware of, using that Dalek to like capture Jody. And then that ultimately brings her to be captured, kind of like a very similar storyline to like the Pandorica Opens to a degree. It actually kind of is very similar to that in the 11th Doctor's run, where like a bunch of Doctor's enemies work together to capture her. So I guess that's the plot. And then they're also going to like blow up the Earth, and the Doctor and the Master's going to use himself in the Doctor's body to ruin the Doctor's reputation. Okay, I think I got it. I think that's somewhere vaguely in the vicinity of this. And then you also have Ace and Tegan here from classic Doctor Who, by the way, I don't really know much about them. I haven't seen much of classic Doctor Who, so you have them in here, and they did a decent enough job of like making me feel for these characters that I haven't I don't know much about as someone who has not watched the older Doctor Who stuff. I've only watched mostly just current Doctor Who since Christopher Eccleston, and so you have them here too. And they're sort of dealing with like these missing paintings that sort of point to the Master as Rasputin. And then ultimately like the Cybermen like coming to take over Earth with the rushing nesting doll thing that the Master has. Okay. As is clearly indicative by the fact that I am trying desperately to articulate this plot to all of you, it was weird and strange, but like I was kind of enthralled by it in the sense that like Sha Sha Dhawan as the Master is just so charismatic on screen. He's kind of like Jody in the sense that like I love his presence and I love his energy that he brings to the Master so much that I'm almost sad that he's in this era of Doctor Who, where it's like I really hope we get to see him in future Doctor Who projects, that like he can actually get a little bit more time to shine, because he is actually great and his charisma like saves every scene, and I adore him, just coming after the Doctor. And the scene where like he's giving that speech to the Doctor in the lecture hall, he's like, oh, she knows she should leave but she can't because she knows I don't make idle threats, and like, oh look, like I thought that was all great. Oh, God. And I'm like, at this point, like, I know there are things that I could pick apart in all of this plot to be like, this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense. Like, how the Master is able to, like, jump into the broadcast of different things, how he's able to, like, get into out of cells and things like that. Like, I could do that work, but at this point, it feels like that just feels like a bad move, because it's just so messy to begin with that I'd like to try to articulate the like problems with the like basic structure of the plot, like the nitpicks and plot holes. It's like, who cares at this point? Really, I'm just in for the ride of it at this point. And I guess that's kind of where I was feeling on it, where it's just like, yeah, sure, I'm here for it. It's fun, weird nonsense. It's a mess, but I'm here for it. I'm sorry that this is like a rambling review, but I just have very little way to like articulate a lot of this. Okay. So then we get to Jody having been forced to turn into the Master, which again, I feel like is just a disservice to Jody a little bit, because it's like, this is her finale and she's like spending a good chunk of it not there as the Doctor. I did enjoy the Master getting to put on like I think it's the 5th Doctor sort of like celery outfit and everything. I thought that was fun, and him trying to ruin the Doctor's reputation. Though it's like, why couldn't you have done that without taking over the Doctor's body? You could have just pretended to be her. I feel like that's even a plot that's been done before, where the Master pretended to be the Doctor to ruin her reputation. So there's that. And yeah, sort of having to go along for the ride. But then we also get this other sequence, which I thought was really fun, where we have Jody on the edge of regeneration, this sort of like nebulous liminal space thing. And we get to see a bunch of the other Doctors who are still alive, who the personal favorite of mine was Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor. I always love seeing him. I've listened to every single one of his Big Finish audio dramas, and I actually really love him as the Doctor, and I kind of wish we got to see a little bit more of him other than his movie and the one-off 10-minute special that we got a few years ago for the 50th Doctor Who anniversary. So it was just fun to see that little bit in those moments, and it felt like it was trying to be this anniversary celebration of the Doctor, because we're hitting the 60th anniversary special very soon. So it's like, oh, here's all these older Doctors that you get to see. Would have loved to. I wish we had gotten. I know it's like, it's weird because it's like you're bringing back all these older Doctors. And so I almost would have liked to see Matt Smith or Christopher Eccleston or David Tennant, though we'll talk about him in a minute, or Peter Capaldi. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Peter Capaldi's great. I would have liked to see one of them in there too. That would have been kind of nice. So it just seems weirdly odd to leave them out of this. Though David Tennant could have been left out because of where we're going with him in a bit. So on the one hand, I like this because this is kind of fun, and it was nice to also see these moments between the older Doctors and Ace and Tegan getting to be with their older Doctors, like Sylvester McCoy, in those moments. Again, I felt those scenes actually resonated even as someone who has not seen those characters interact with the Doctor before. So I thought that those were nice, and the hologram idea of the Doctor, of like the Doctor having made an AI version of herself that could help in situations but like doesn't completely react in situations with full understanding. I thought that was actually a clever conceit that kind of makes sense to me as like a Deus Ex Machina sort of thing. Again, in another story, I would have knocked it more. Here, I'm just like, sure, put it in with the nonsense. I'm here with it. It works. It's fun. I'm critical analysis of someone gone out the window to a degree here. So fine on that front. And so I liked seeing those moments, and I like seeing these little bits, but it also feels like a disservice to, again, Jody, because it's like, this is her last story. Let it focus on her instead of like bringing all these other Doctors in. And it does feel like it distracts from her, which is sad. But again, indicative of this era. But those were kind of nice little cameos. And I don't even remember, like, this whole last little sequence is like a blur where Jody is able to regenerate herself once, which we got Joe Martin kind of last minute return as the Doctor in the hologram form, is able to trick the Master into regenerating back into himself, which is nice. Also, Vinder's here for reasons. Oh God, Vinder. He's there. And Graham's also there too. It's just like, why did you have Graham? Look, I love Graham. Graham is probably my favorite companion of Jodie's era, but like Graham just shows up here. And I'm like, why couldn't you just have Dan fill that role? I feel like it would have been better to have Dan, because Graham had a good ending. I would have liked maybe Graham to show up in the last few minutes of the episode. I thought that would have been sweeter, just to have him show up there and have Dan fulfill Graham's spot in this episode. Because then it wouldn't have felt like you just were so disposing of Dan. So I would have much rather, again, loving Graham a lot, would have much rather see him fulfill Dan's function, or Dan fulfill Graham's function here. But whatever, at this point. I'm really struggling. I am sorry, everybody. This is not my best review, but I'm just trying. Usually it's much easier to articulate my thoughts here. So we wrap out the episode, and Jody saves this alien MacGuffin child octopus jellyfish thing. And the Master says, well, if you can't be the Doctor, if I can't be the Doctor, you can't be either, and hurts her to cause her to regenerate. And I'm like, cool, I guess that works. And then Jody starts regenerating, and she gets to have this. Okay, here's where I can have more definitive thoughts. I did like the ending bit of this episode, where once Jody had saved everyone and everything's sort of wrapping up, Jody starts to regenerate, and she gets to have like a last moment with her fam, and it's like her extended fam throughout all of the ages of the Doctor. I thought that was actually very sweet. And I thought it actually spoke to what Jody, at least a through line with this Jody's Doctor, as messy as it has been like her love of family and yet her distance from them at the same time. Like wanting to have a bunch of people around her and yet also feeling very distanced from them. So I actually really liked that she gets to look at all these people that she's had throughout her lives and gets to have a moment like, yeah, I am loved and I have these people in my life. And then she also gets to have that last moment with Yaz, which I also thought brought a tear to my eye a little bit too. Where they sort of like, where Jody sort of says, I've loved this time that I've had with you, and sort of a nice cap on the Yaz-Doctor relationship that never really could be, even though they did have romantic feelings for each other, which I liked, but I also thought, like, I wish they had done that earlier so they'd have more time to develop it. But it is a nice ending here. And I did like the Doctor saying, let's not say goodbye. And I thought that actually hit me. But the Doctor saying, I need to do this regeneration alone. Which, again, fits with what I was just saying, that the Doctor has always wanted a family. At least this version of the Doctor, and yet has always felt distance from them. And I think her going off to regenerate on her own fits her. So I thought all that worked, and I will admit that the sort of kind of doctor support group that we get at the end of the series, at this episode, I thought was also really nice. We get a bunch of other cameos too from different doctor companions. I would have liked some modern era companions in there too. Like you could have had Martha Jones in there, maybe. Would have been nice to see. But it is nice to have this moment where they all sort of like talk to each other and like say that they're like there for each other and can kind of like commiserate about the doctor and who she is and what she's meant to them. I thought that was all very sweet. So I will get to the regeneration in a second, but let me just sort of put a cap on this story. Like I said, as you can clearly tell with this review, it is a mess. And I struggle to articulate, having just watched it. Maybe if I sat down and sort of like watched it a few times, I could better articulate my thoughts. But having just watched it and just been on this roller coaster, I will say that like it felt to me like it made zero sense. Felt like it made a little disservice to Jody's final time as the Doctor in service of a lot of cameo stuff that I think took away from her time. But there are moments that do shine through it. Like Sacha Dhawan's Doctor, like Jody's moments with Yaz, the kind of emotional bits with Jody, the hologram stuff I thought was actually kind of fun and clever, even though it was a bit of a Deus Ex Machina. I did actually enjoy all of that for what it was. And I guess the best way I could put it is like if this had been like an episode coming off of a like much stronger run of Doctor Who, under Chris Chibnall, I probably would be more upset by it. I would probably say, yeah, this is an absolute mess, and what the hell was this? But as like something that is sort of a finale capstone to this era of Doctor Who, it just feels it weirdly feels fitting to have it be this messy, strange, out there thing. And I am always someone who like, you know what? I'll take weird, strange, messy things over something boring and rote and predictable, because predictable this was not. So it was fascinating to watch. Good? I don't know. Fascinating and intriguing and at least entertaining, yes. There are other things you could talk about, like how there's no wrapping up of the lonely child storyline. There's no real end of Jo Martin's time. There's like she appears, but she's not really given a nice finale to her time as the Doctor, so hopefully she'll show up in future. It just feels like a good finale for this Doctor, and ultimately leaves me feeling like, man, I would have liked to see what Jody could have had given, a much tighter, stronger writing staff. Again, I'm not trying to hate on Chris Chibnall, but he's not been the strongest writer for Doctor Who, and I'll just leave it there without getting into more thoughtful, longer critiques of him. Because I did really like Jody. And it feels kind of sad because I would have liked her to get a stronger moment to end on. But it kind of fits her, doesn't it? So hopefully she'll get stuff to do in Big Finish. This brings us, though, to that regeneration moment, which a lot of us kind of predicted. We thought we would get Ncuti Gatwa regenerating here, but it's not that. That's not the case. We actually get Jody regenerating into David Tennant, which, people had speculated that was going to be the case, but I'm actually going to be fascinated with where they take that, because I think there's an interesting thing that they could do with David Tennant being the new Doctor for the next special, at least, and I'm sure Ncuti Gatwa will appear in that special either at the end or during it, given what we see in the teaser. I think it could be an interesting sort of meta commentary on nostalgia, because Russell T Davies is now retaking over Doctor Who, and like him coming in feels like, oh, we can do this nostalgia thing of having this new, like having the older Doctor and the older showrunner coming into this show, and it'd be like a nostalgia fest and doing the same thing again. And I actually feel like Russell T Davies, I'm hoping that he's going to make a comment using David Tennant to be like, no, we're not going to just be nostalgia. That you're going to get your nostalgia, we're going to look at the past, but actually we're going to move forward. Even though I am the showrunner who ran the show before, we're actually going to do something new here. So I think that there's a cool meta commentary that can be made with the next episode of this in whatever, the 60th anniversary special that we're going to be getting. I think there'll be a cool meta commentary being made there. We'll see what ultimately Russell T Davies does with it, but I think that it could be a cool meta commentary on nostalgia and the fact that we're bringing back an old showrunner with David Tennant. And also, nostalgia is not always a bad thing, and David Tennant is my favorite Doctor, and I am kind of excited just to see him back, along with Donna Noble. So we'll see where that eventually goes. But it was an interesting, I wasn't surprised, but I also was like, oh, I'm interested. I'm sure other people have I can already hear my friend Vera being much more upset about this regeneration than I am. I'm very curious to hear her review of this episode, because I just know she probably is going to have a much more, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like she's going to have a much more displeased view of that regeneration than I do. I'm just more interested by it. So yeah, that's my thoughts, such as they are, on Doctor Who, The Power of the Doctor. What did you think of this episode? Like I said, I know that I am a bit rambly and a bit off kilter in terms of this review, but it kind of fits this episode, doesn't it? I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, down in the comments. What did you think of Jodie Whitaker's final episode as the Doctor? Let me know all of that down below. And beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.